I'm James Murray. I'm the health officer for the Town of Exeter. The Town of Exeter, through the Select Board, has passed a mask ordinance for the town. This would require face coverings when you're in situations downtown outside where social distancing is not possible and within businesses within the Town of Exeter. So, face covering per this ordinance is a covering made of cloth, fabric, or other soft permeable material without holes that covers the nose, mouth, and surrounding areas of the lower face. So face covering may be factory made, it can be homemade as well. So this ordinance does play off the Safer at Home guidance from the state, as well as NHDHHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, and CDC recommendations and guidelines. So employees of all businesses shall wear a face covering over their mouth and nose when interacting with the public or whenever the 6 feet of social distance is impossible for a coworker or a customer. So this specific one does not apply to back of house or kitchens in restaurants. Under the Safer at Home guidelines, this is already happening. They're not required to wear face coverings. There's no evidence of foodborne spread of COVID, and the heat of a kitchen, it can be dangerous to wear a face mask. So we've included that exception just to kind of piggyback off the Safer at Home guidelines. Also, under this ordinance, we've made a variance process for businesses. So this goes for businesses where the wearing of a face covering is just counterintuitive to the situation. Being that there are a lot of unique businesses in the Town of Exeter, we wanted to make a process where if a business has a unique situation where a face covering would not make sense within that business, they can apply to the health department by contacting me for a variance. What would happen is there would be an inspection, usually a conversation with the business owner. We've already issued 2 of these so far. And just kind of a review of the situation and seeing if it makes sense for face coverings to be not required in certain situations. So in instances where one family is in a room, let's say, if the family all lives in the same household, they're already not wearing face coverings at home. So if the business owner can show that safety can still be provided to other patrons, and let's say this one room where a family is, they can take off their mask safely, sure. We want to try to include as much common sense into this as possible, and it's just tough to write in that way. So we've included that variance process just as kind of a blanket statement, so we don't have to list off each individual unique situation, and instead can have a conversation between businesses and the health department to just kind of assess where a variance would be necessary. So this ordinance also applies to getting in line in businesses or in restaurants, inside or outside, that while in line, you should wear a face covering to provide safety to those passing by. Important note that when you're seated at a table, inside or outside of a restaurant, once you're seated, you don't need the face covering. It's very hard to enjoy a meal or a drink when you're wearing a face covering. We understand that. So in cases where you're seated in a restaurant or outside the restaurant, they have outdoor dining, it would not be required. It would be required while you're moving around within or directly outside the restaurant. So when we're talking about outside downtown areas, and there is a map available on the town website along with this ordinance. So on the town website, you can find a copy of this ordinance as well as the map that applies to the downtown areas. This does apply to outside areas where social distancing is not possible. So if you're walking and there's 6 feet around you, no one within that 6 feet, you don't have to wear a face covering. It's once it starts getting more congested and there's a lot of foot traffic, that's when we want to see face coverings to protect each other. So again, going on that, if you're walking down the street and there's absolutely no one around, there's no need to wear a face covering. If you were walking down the street and there's one other person and you're quickly passing by each other, again, no need to wear a face covering in a transient situation like that. It is recommended that you increase as much distance as possible, but just transitory passing is also not considered an exposure at that point. So members of the public utilizing public recreational lands are strongly recommended, but not required to wear face coverings. This is because usually when you're using these areas, there's plenty of room for social distancing, and also exercise is most of the, I guess, the point of using these areas. So while you're exercising, you're not required to wear a face covering under this ordinance. Let's see. So residents, visitors, members of the public entering or present in a residential or commercial building that has more than 2 units must wear a face covering in common areas and communal spaces when social distancing is not possible. So again, it goes back on social distancing. If you can maintain more than 6 feet around you, you shouldn't have to wear a face covering. But in situations where you're in a communal area or common area for a large apartment building and there are others around you, you should wear a face covering. Face covering is not required for any person with medical or developmental condition to whom wearing a face covering would pose a threat to their health or safety. The point of the face covering is to make us safer in town, but for individuals that have conditions where a face covering is not safe for them, they should not wear a face mask. Also, children under the age of 2 are not recommended to wear a face mask per the CDC. So this ordinance applies to children under the age of 10 are not required to wear a face covering. So this is parental discretion, but children under the age of 2 specifically should not wear a face covering per the CDC. Also, in businesses, a person may remove their face covering if they're being asked to do so for identification purposes. So if they're purchasing a product or a service that requires identification, they're allowed to remove their face covering for the purposes of identification. So the whole point of this ordinance is education first. We're not looking for people to report individuals. If there's an area of town or a specific business that someone notices there's no one wearing face coverings, or it's become a regular occurrence that people aren't wearing face coverings there, and in those cases you can report that the area or the business isn't, and we'll try to put more flyers up, hang more signage, provide masks, things like that to kind of help educate the public as much as possible. But we're not looking to enforce anything on individuals. It's more just providing the education where appropriate. So we do have face coverings here at the health department. I'm coming up with signage for businesses to post, and we're trying to find ways to disseminate that as much as possible.